The strange thing about this island wasn't that it was empty. It was that it felt alive, like it was waiting for us. No birds, no sound, just a sense that someone or something had been watching long before we even arrived. If you've ever felt that uneasy tingle that makes you question reality, you'll understand why this is different. And before we dive in, I need to ask you if you think you can handle the truth of what really happens on places like this. Hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like, because only those who dare to stay until the end will truly see what's waiting. Most people would turn away. Most people would run. But if you stay, I promise you'll understand why curiosity can be the deadliest mistake you ever make. There were 3 of us on the boat that afternoon. Me, Tyler, and Marcus. We had rented a small motorboat from a marina along the Gulf Coast during a weekend trip. It wasn't a party situation, nothing reckless or dramatic. The water was calm, the sky was completely clear, and visibility stretched endlessly in every direction. We had been cruising for nearly 40 minutes when Tyler, who was sitting at the front, narrowed his eyes at the horizon and asked, "Was that there before?" At first I assumed he was joking. The ocean plays tricks on you sometimes. Distant clouds can look like land. But as we moved forward, the shape became more defined. It wasn't a cloud. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was dark rock rising from the water, low and wide, with a pale strip that looked like sand. An island. The strange part was that none of us remembered passing anything like that on the way out. Marcus immediately pulled out his phone and opened the navigation app. We zoomed out to get a broader view of the coastline. Nothing. No small landmass. No rock formation, no hazard marker, just uninterrupted blue. He switched to another app. Same result. According to every map available to us, we were surrounded by open water. Logically, that should have been enough to turn around. Instead, it made us curious. There's something about discovering something that shouldn't be there that overrides common sense. We weren't thinking about danger. We were thinking about being the first to step foot somewhere unknown. As we approached, I started noticing how quiet everything felt. The engine was still running, but the sound seemed dull, as if the air itself were absorbing it. The wind that had been lightly pushing against us disappeared completely. The water flattened out unnaturally, smoothing into a glass-like surface that reflected the sky too perfectly. And then I noticed something that bothered me more than anything else. There were no birds. Not a single seagull circled above the island. No distant cries. No movement in the air. Even the most deserted patches of coast have some kind of wildlife. This place had none. It looked untouched, but not in a peaceful way. It looked unused. We circled the island once before slowing down near the sandy edge. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a football field. Mostly dark rock, with one accessible shoreline. No trees, no visible plants, just uneven stone and pale sand. No dock, no debris, no sign of anyone visiting. And yet, something about it felt deliberate, like it wasn't random geography, but something placed. We killed the engine and drifted the final few feet to shore. The sand felt colder than expected when I stepped onto it, firm and compact under my shoes. Tyler made a joke about claiming it in our names, but his voice didn't carry the same enthusiasm it had earlier. The silence pressed against us in a way that made even casual conversation feel inappropriate. There was a slight incline leading up to a flatter section near the center of the island. From the top, we could see our boat resting just offshore, and nothing but open water in every direction. No other islands, no ships, no distant structures. It felt isolated beyond what should have been geographically possible. About halfway across the flat clearing, Marcus stopped walking and asked if we heard that. We all listened. There was nothing, and that was when it became obvious. We couldn't hear the ocean anymore. No gentle waves brushing the sand. No water movement against the hull of the boat. The entire island existed inside a kind of muted bubble. That's when we saw the fire pit. It was constructed from medium-sized stones arranged in a near-perfect circle. Inside were charred pieces of wood that didn't look eroded by time or weather. The ash hadn't scattered. The stones weren't displaced. It looked recent. Someone had been here. The rational explanation was simple. Maybe this island did exist on older charts. Maybe it was rarely visited. Maybe a fisherman or another group of explorers had stopped by. But that didn't explain why it wasn't on any map. And it didn't explain why the air felt wrong. Near the fire pit, partially resting against a rock, was a smartphone. Tyler picked it up and instinctively looked around, as if expecting someone to shout that he'd found it. No one did. The phone powered on immediately when he pressed the side button. Full battery, no signal, no notifications, no visible damage from water or sand. The lock screen showed a photo of the ocean taken from this exact location. Same shoreline, same angle toward the horizon. It had clearly been taken on this island. But in the lower corner of the image, near the waterline, there was a figure. It was distant, almost blending into the background, but unmistakable once you noticed it. Someone standing still, facing the camera. We all turned toward the shoreline at the same time. There was no one there. Marcus suggested it could have been an old photo from another place, maybe a coincidence in landscape. But even he didn't sound convinced. The shape of the rocks matched. The curve of the sand was identical. The photo had been taken here. We checked the phone's gallery. It was almost empty. Just a handful of similar photos. Ocean, horizon, different lighting conditions. In each one, if you looked closely enough, there was something slightly off. A shadow that didn't match the angle of the sun. A darker vertical shape near the water. In one photo, the figure was closer. That was the moment I felt the first real surge of fear, not because of what we were seeing, but because of the implication. If the phone belonged to someone who had been here recently, then where were they? We started noticing footprints around the clearing. At first, they blended with ours, but then we saw deeper impressions in the sand near the fire pit. They overlapped and crossed each other, as if someone had been pacing in circles. The unsettling part was that none of them clearly led back down to the shoreline. They simply became faint, and then stopped. We checked our phones for photos from the island. There were none. Not a single image of the fire pit, the phone, the shoreline. The only new photo taken during that time frame was one of the three of us on the boat, smiling into the camera. Behind us was nothing but open ocean. But when I zoomed in on the reflection in the water behind us, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Between our reflections, slightly distorted by the ripples, was a fourth shape, standing where no one had been. We tried to find the island again the next day. We followed the same direction, the same estimated distance, The same heading. There was nothing there, just endless water. I don't know what we stepped onto that afternoon. I don't know who the foam belonged to or why every trace of the island disappeared the moment we left. What I do know is that sometimes, when something appears in the distance and doesn't quite make sense, it's not an invitation. It's a warning. And sometimes the worst mistake you can make is steering closer just to prove to yourself that it's probably nothing. We had heard rumors of the island for years. Fishermen spoke of it in hushed voices, calling it the island that isn't there, a place that appeared only under certain tides, certain weather, almost like it existed in another layer of reality. We didn't believe any of it at first, of course. Stories like that are for tourists and thrill seekers, but curiosity has a way of pushing you toward things you shouldn't see. It started on a dull, overcast morning. My friends, Lena and David and I, had rented a small dinghy from a local harbor. We wanted to explore the coastline, nothing more. The sea was calm, the clouds thickened low, and visibility was limited. But it made the world feel intimate, as if the horizon itself were holding secrets. About 3 hours into our excursion, I noticed a shape in the distance. At first, it was barely more than a dark smudge against the gray sky. Then it became a jagged outline rising sharply from the water. An island, one that had never appeared on any map, any navigation app, any chart we could find. "I don't think that's supposed to be there," David muttered, squinting across the water. Lena leaned forward from the boat's edge. "It's dark," she said. "Look at it. No vegetation, no light. Nothing moves." Her voice was tight, the way it gets when fear starts threading through curiosity. The moment I saw it, I felt the first pinch of that unease, that instinctual knowledge that we were walking into something we wouldn't leave unchanged. We decided to head closer. There was no rational reason, only the pull of the unknown. The closer we got, the stranger it felt. The water around the island seemed unnaturally still. There was no lapping of waves, no wind brushing the surface. Nothing but a mirror-like expanse reflecting the heavy clouds above. It was as if the sea itself had been swallowed into silence, leaving only the island to exist in isolation. The shoreline was sharp and black, jagged rocks forming a thin boundary with pale, wet sand. No trees, no plants, no birds in sight. We tied the dinghy and stepped onto the sand. Immediately, it felt wrong. The ground was too cold, unyielding under our shoes, though the sun was hidden and the day not particularly chilly. Lena let out a soft gasp, stepping back. "It's like the island is waiting." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as nerves, but my voice caught in my throat. There was something in the air. Not a sound, not a scent, but a weight, a presence, something observing us. I couldn't see it, but I felt it threading through the island, curling around the rocks, slipping beneath the sand. We began walking along the narrow beach. The island wasn't large, but it was deceptive in shape. Jagged rock formed shallow cliffs and unexpected dips, creating small alcoves that vanished behind curves, and everywhere we looked, there were markings in the sand, impressions too large to be human. Not tracks from shoes, not claw marks, but deep, deliberate depressions that circled the small expanse like they were pacing, waiting, planning. Each footprint ended abruptly, fading into smooth sand as if the person who had made it simply stepped out of reality. "Do you see that?" Lena whispered, pointing at a dark stone near the water. I looked and saw a formation that resembled a crude face, perhaps carved by erosion or perhaps by intent. The black rock was streaked with lines that suggested eyes, a nose, and a mouth. But the mouth seemed open, like a scream trapped in stone. I shook my head. "It's just rock," I said, though my words sounded hollow. We moved inland toward the center of the island, a small clearing that felt like the island's heart. Here, the sand was mixed with ash and charred fragments of wood. A fire had been lit here recently. Not old, not weathered. The smell of smoke was faint, but unmistakable. Someone had been here, not long ago. And yet, no signs of life lingered. No footprints led away from the center, except the ones that ended in smooth, untouched sand, as if whoever had been there vanished before our eyes. Then, we noticed them. Shapes in the shadows. At first, I thought it was a trick of the clouds, the black, jagged rocks casting strange silhouettes. But as we moved closer, the shapes shifted. They weren't static. Tall, dark figures, just at the edge of perception, flitting between rocks just beyond the clearing, always retreating when we looked directly at them. David froze. "They're moving," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're watching." Lena grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, white-knuckled. We all looked around, hearts pounding, but nothing fully emerged. Only glimpses, corners of darkness that shouldn't have been empty. Panic was creeping in, but curiosity held us frozen. I suggested we keep moving. We explored a narrow path along the cliffside. The wind picked up slightly here, sending a low whistle through the rocks. And then we heard it. Faint whispers, almost beneath hearing, almost in our own minds. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but the whispers were distinct, fragmented. Names, warnings we couldn't tell. The sound moved with us. If we slowed, it paused. If we hurried, it followed. We reached another clearing. Here, the sand was disturbed in patterns too regular to be natural. Spirals and lines etched like symbols, intricate and precise. The markings reminded me of diagrams I had seen in obscure folklore books, circles meant to trap or contain. Lena refused to step inside the patterns, muttering prayers under her breath. I felt the same impulse to stay away, but something drew me closer. I had to see. I had to know. I stepped inside one spiral. The whispers surged, clearer now, nearly intelligible. It felt like the island itself was breathing through me. The hairs on my arms stood straight. David grabbed my shoulder. "Get out," he said firmly, almost shouting. We all moved backward together. The instant I left the spiral, the whispers vanished, leaving nothing but the muted sound of the non-existent waves. By now, fear had overtaken curiosity. We decided to leave, heading back toward the shoreline, but the island wasn't ready to let us go. The rocks shifted under our feet, or perhaps our perception shifted. The path we had taken before now seemed longer, twisted. The boat, once close to shore, appeared farther than it should have been. A shadow moved along the water, impossibly tall, too thin to be human. And just for a heartbeat, I could have sworn it was pointing at us. We reached the dinghy and tried to untie it. The rope had knotted itself strangely, impossible tangles, as if resisting our departure. Finally, with combined effort, we freed it. As we climbed in, the shadow reappeared, standing in the shallow water beside the boat, unmoving, silently observing us. Its outline was indistinct, like it existed half in another dimension. Lena screamed, and the shape vanished instantly. The sudden sound of waves, the rush of wind, the call of distant gulls, all returned at once, overwhelming after the oppressive silence. We didn't speak much as we motored back to the mainland. The horizon seemed unnaturally smooth, almost like the island had been erased. No rocks, no pale sand, nothing. Only the open ocean, endless and unbroken. When we tried to plot our route on the GPS, nothing unusual appeared. According to every device, the island had never existed. Weeks later, I researched local folklore. There were whispered accounts of islands that appear only to lure visitors. Islands that trap those who step onto their shores. Islands that feed on fear and curiosity alike. Some say the island never lets you leave unchanged. You see things no one else can. Feel presences that don't belong, and carry whispers in your mind that return in dreams. Quiet and persistent, long after you think you've escaped. Even now I see shadows in the corners of my vision. Sometimes I hear whispers when I'm alone, just faint, almost beyond recognition. I haven't told many people about the island. They would call me insane. But Lena and David, they hear it too. We all do. And we know deep down that if someone else were to find that island, it would wait for them exactly as it waited for us. Patient, silent, hungry for curiosity. Sometimes I wonder how many people have set foot there and never returned. Sometimes I think about the footprints in the sand that ended abruptly, and I feel a cold certainty that those who vanished are not gone at all. Not really. They are still there, trapped in the whispers, shadows walking between the rocks, caught between reality and something older, darker, and impossibly patient. The island exists beyond maps and time. It waits. And it will always wait for the next curious person brave enough to step onto its sand. The first time we saw the island, it was wrapped in a thick, almost unnatural mist. From the deck of our small sailboat, it looked deceptively small, like a harmless speck of green and gray rising from the restless sea. But there was something about it, something that pressed against the edges of your mind, a subtle wrongness that didn't belong. Mara, Felix, and I had been planning this summer sailing trip along the northern coast. For months, none of us expected to stumble across the island. It wasn't on any map we had. And yet, there it was, rising suddenly from the water, a gray shadow among whitecaps. We approached slowly, curiosity and unease warring in our minds. The lighthouse tower was the first thing to emerge from the mist. It leaned slightly, weathered by decades of storms, its paint peeling in wide, curling sheets. The windows were black, empty, and staring. No light came from the beacon, though the sky was thick with gray clouds, and the waves seemed to churn with a strange intent. We joked nervously about ghosts and old lighthouse keepers, but none of us laughed for long. I felt it immediately. The hair on my neck stood up, and a cold, creeping fear settled in my stomach. The shore was jagged and unforgiving. Black rocks jutted from the water, sharp enough to cut, scraping against the hull of our boat as we anchored. The waves hissed quietly, like breathing, and the air carried a metallic tang that made my mouth dry. Felix jumped first, landing with surprising grace, his feet slipping slightly on wet stone. Mara hesitated, then followed, gripping my arm tightly. When I stepped down, I felt the bite of the rocks through my shoes and shivered involuntarily. Immediately, the island seemed to swallow sound, not just the absence of voices, the absence of expectation. Birds did not call, no insects buzzed. Even the waves seemed muffled, as if the world beyond the mist had been muted. Mara whispered, "It feels wrong here." And I nodded, too aware of the truth to answer. The lighthouse door was warped and slightly ajar. A draft, damp and smelling of rust, escaped from within. Felix pushed it open, the hinges screaming in protest. The sound seemed obscene in the thick quiet. Inside, the lighthouse was empty, save for a spiraling staircase leading upward into darkness. The floorboards groaned under each step, loud enough that our own heartbeats sounded faint in comparison. Despite the unease gnawing at us, we climbed. Halfway up, the walls changed. Scratches appeared, deep, frantic, claw-like marks spiraling upward. A substance, dark and sticky, had been smeared along the plaster. Felix shone his flashlight, revealing faded words scrawled with a shaky hand. "Leave. Don't stay." They watched. None of us spoke. Mara's eyes darted to the stairwell behind us, frozen on something that wasn't there. A shape just beyond perception. Thick shadows curling like smoke along the steps. The lantern room at the top revealed more than we expected. The windows were streaked with salt and grime, but beyond them, the island itself seemed impossible. Cliffs twisted at angles that made my stomach lurch. Paths appeared and disappeared. Water pooled where there should have been sand, and tiny, dark figures moved along the rocks. At first, I thought they were birds. Then I realized they didn't fly. They stood, watching, adjusting slightly when our gaze met theirs, then vanishing when we blinked. Mara's hand clutched mine, white-knuckled. "We need to leave," she whispered. But the way down had changed. The staircase stretched impossibly longer than memory allowed. Shadows creeping along the walls like living things. Something brushed my shoulder. Cold, insistent, though no one was there. Felix stumbled, catching himself on the railing, eyes wide and darting. By the time we reached the ground floor, the door was gone. Or maybe it had never been there. The lighthouse seemed to have rotated around us. Outside, the mist was denser, swallowing the edges of the island. Strange footprints appeared on the jagged rocks, not ours, twisting in impossible patterns, ending abruptly in midair or curving into shadows. We ran toward our boat, adrenaline burning through fear, but the water had changed. Dark shapes stood in the shallows, moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm. No faces, no features, yet the presence radiated hostility. Whispers rose, threading through our minds, barely distinguishable, almost thoughts of their own. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have come." We pushed the dinghy into the water, engine spluttering to life. Mara's hands shook as she clutched the sides. Felix's face was pale, lips tight. "They're in the water," he muttered. I glimpsed their forms beneath the surface, sliding effortlessly, keeping pace no matter how fast we moved. Every glance back made my stomach twist. The island had not shrunk. It loomed, impossibly large, alive. The whispers became words, clear, insistent. You belong here now. Hours passed in a blur of mist and black water. When land finally emerged, we barely recognized it as mainland. The island was gone. GPS showed nothing. Charts confirmed no landmass had existed. Mara's clothes were damp, though she had never entered the water. Felix claimed he felt something brush his arm again. And I still hear whispers when the wind carries it right. Quiet, patient, threading into my thoughts. Even after we tried to research the island, nothing concrete existed. Old sailor logs mentioned a lighthouse that appears, fragments of tales and warnings, but no record, no map, no proof. Some parts of us lingered there. Dreams, visions, and the faintest sounds reminded us of the island. Shadows in our rooms, whispers in the wind, water dripping where it could not. Weeks after, I returned alone. The boat rocked gently on the familiar coast, fog rolling in. And there it was again, the lighthouse, faint and gray, peeking through the mist. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible. My gut, however, knew better. The island waits, always, patient, watching, hungry. Inside the lighthouse, each step became heavier. The walls no longer warped. They breathed. Faint laughter echoed. Human, yet not. Floors twisted beneath my feet. I thought I saw Mara and Felix ahead. Shadows stretched and thin. My own reflection in broken windows seemed alive, moving independently, lips whispering in sync with the island's voice. Stay. You belong. I stumbled down twisted hallways that led nowhere. Doors opened to empty rooms, chairs tipped over, objects scattered, bookshelves fallen. Every corner, every shadow held a presence. I felt watched from multiple angles at once. A low hum vibrating through the air resonated in my chest. The island didn't just observe, it anticipated. Hours, or was it days, passed. I could no longer tell. The fog outside thickened until I couldn't see my hands before me. Shapes moved just beyond vision, darting, shifting, feeding on fear. Every attempt to leave led me back to the lighthouse, every door closing before I could pass. Exhaustion gave way to terror. I fell to the stone floor, too afraid to move. Then I saw it. The figures, dark and formless, at the edges of the rooms. They advanced slowly, deliberately, merging with the shadows. Whispers rose, forming words now clear and cruel. You cannot leave. You are ours. A cold, wet feeling touched my shoulder. My own arm? Not mine. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears, blending with the island's rhythm. When I awoke, I was on the mainland, alone. The lighthouse and the island gone. But I carry them. Shadows linger in peripheral vision. Whispers trace my thoughts at night. My reflection sometimes moves independently. I cannot explain it. Cannot tell anyone without losing them to ridicule. But Mara and Felix feel it too. Every breeze, every wave, every foggy dawn carries a memory of the island. And I know Without doubt, the island waits. It waits for the next curious souls, the next boat to drift too close, the next laughter or whispered dare to tempt fate. And it will take them just as it took us. The Lighthouse Island does not forgive. It does not forget. It does not exist for long enough to leave evidence. And yet, it is alive, patient, eternal, watching, waiting, always.